Shadows of February 2nd, Groundhog Day. It's just a goofy little tradition, right? A groundhog pops out, sees its shadow, and we all laugh about 6 more weeks of winter. Nothing serious. Nothing to worry about. That's what I thought too, until this year. You've got to understand, I've never believed in omens or superstitions. I'm the kind of person who walks under ladders, breaks mirrors, all of it. But now I don't laugh. Let me tell you why. It started like any other day. My boss had roped me into working an overnight shift at the community center. The place is ancient, creaky floors, flickering lights, and a heating system that barely works. It's one of those buildings where the air always feels heavy, like it's holding on to years of secrets. That night, snow was falling in big fat flakes, muffling the world outside. I was the only one there, sitting behind the front desk with a lukewarm coffee and a stack of paperwork I had zero intention of finishing. Around midnight, the quiet started to get to me. You ever notice how silence isn't really silent? It's full of little sounds, the hum of the lights, the groan of the walls, the whisper of your own breathing. But then, something changed. It was subtle at first. I thought I heard footsteps in the hallway behind me. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, listening. The hallway was dark, long, with doors leading to empty offices. Nobody was supposed to be there. Hello? I called out, my voice trembling a little. No answer. I told myself it was just the building settling, the way old places do. But deep down, I didn't believe that. I turned back to my desk, trying to shake the unease. That's when the phone rang. It was an old landline, the kind with a shrill, piercing ring. I almost knocked over my coffee reaching for it. Community Center, this is Mark, I said, trying to sound normal. Static. Hello? I repeated, more static, and then a voice. It's coming. I slammed the phone down so hard it hurt my hand. My heart was racing, and I could feel the sweat prickling at the back of my neck. It's a prank, I told myself. Some bored kid messing around, but then the lights flickered, and I swear for just a second I saw something move at the edge of the hallway. A shadow. I grabbed the flashlight from under the desk and stood up. My hands were shaking so badly, the beam of light wobbled as I pointed it down the hall. Whoever's there, you need to leave. I'm calling the cops. The words echoed back to me, empty and hollow. And then the whispering started. It was faint, almost too soft to hear, but it was there. Dozens of voices overlapping, speaking words I couldn't understand. My throat went dry. The flashlight flickered, and the shadows at the end of the hall seemed to ripple like they were alive. I ran. I didn't even think about it, I just bolted for the front door. But when I got there, it wouldn't budge. The lock was fine, the deadbolt wasn't turned, but the door wouldn't open. It felt like something was holding it shut. That's when I heard it again. Tap, 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 tap. Coming closer now. I spun around, pressing my back to the door, and shone the flashlight down the hall. The beam landed on a figure. It was standing there at the edge of the light, a dark shape that didn't have a face or features, just an outline, and then it stepped forward. I squeezed my eyes shut, muttering to myself, "This isn't real. This isn't real." When I opened them again, the figure was gone. But I wasn't alone. Behind me, the phone rang again. I didn't want to answer it, but I couldn't stop myself. My hand moved on its own, picking up the receiver. This time, the voice was clear. "It's already here." The line went dead. I don't remember much after that. I must have blacked out because the next thing I knew I was waking up at the desk. The clock read 6 a.m. and the snowstorm had passed. Everything looked normal. No flickering lights, no shadows. For a moment, I thought it was just a bad dream. But then I saw the calendar on the desk. It still said February 2nd. I thought it was a mistake, but no. The clock kept ticking. The hours passed, and when midnight rolled around, it happened again. The footsteps, the phone calls, the shadows. I've been stuck here ever since. Every day is February 2nd, and every night, the same thing happens. I don't know how to make it stop, but if you ever hear whispers in the dark or see shadows moving when they shouldn't, run. Buried in time. You ever have one of those days where nothing feels right, even though everything seems normal? That was my Groundhog Day last year. The day that won't stop repeating. Yeah, I know how it sounds, like some bad movie plot, but I swear it's real. And if I don't tell someone about it, if I don't warn you, I think it's going to swallow me whole. It started simple, like any other February 2nd. I was visiting my friend Corey in Punxsutawney. He's obsessed with the whole Groundhog Day tradition. Loves the crowds, the cheering, the stupid little groundhog predicting the weather. Me, I was just there for the beer and the party afterward. We were at this rickety old bar just outside town, the kind of place where the floorboards creak and the jukebox hasn't worked since the 80s. The bartender, a wiry old guy with a long gray ponytail, poured us our drinks and said, "Y'all better not be around here after midnight." Corey laughed it off. "What, is the groundhog cursed or something?" The bartender didn't laugh. He just leaned in, his voice low. "Not cursed, but this town ain't right on February 2nd. Never has been." We thought he was just trying to mess with us, some local legend to scare the tourists. But then he said, "If you're still here when the clock strikes 12, it might already be too late." We left the bar around 11:30, heading back to Corey's place. The snow was falling heavy and the roads were empty except for the occasional street lamp casting long shadows. That's when we saw it. At the edge of town, just off the road, there was this old, crumbling cemetery. We'd passed it on the way in, but now there was someone standing in it. A figure, tall and still, just barely visible through the snow. "Who the hell is out there?" Corey muttered, slowing the car. I wish he hadn't stopped. The figure turned toward us, and I swear I felt its gaze, even though it didn't have a face. Just a blank, shadowy void where its features should have been. Then it raised one hand and pointed. Not at the car, at me. "Drive," I whispered. "What?" Corey asked. "Drive." Corey hit the gas, and we sped away, but the image of that figure burned itself into my brain. Back at Corey's place, we tried to shake it off. Maybe it was a trick of the light or some weird local we'd spooked. But then, at exactly midnight, I heard a knock at the door. It wasn't a normal knock. It was slow and deliberate, each sound echoing in the quiet house. Corey froze. "Who the hell is knocking at this hour?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Something in me knew we shouldn't open that door. But Corey didn't listen. He walked to the door, grumbling under his breath, and yanked it open. There was no one there, but the snow on the porch was untouched, not a single footprint. That's when my phone buzzed. It was an alert, emergency broadcast. Do not leave your home. Stay indoors. Lock all windows and doors. "What the hell is this?" Corey asked, staring at his own phone. He'd gotten the same alert. Before I could answer, the lights flickered, and then I saw it. The figure from the cemetery. It was standing in the yard just beyond the porch light. Its shadow stretched long and sharp across the snow, but its body didn't look real. It was too tall, too thin, and its movements were slow, like it was struggling to exist in our world. It raised its hand again, pointing at me. "Corey," I whispered, backing away. "We need to go. Now." But Corey didn't move. He just stood there, staring at the thing like he was in a trance. Then the whispering started. It was faint at first, like wind through the trees, but it grew louder, filling the room. Words I couldn't understand, layered over each other, rising and falling in a rhythm that made my stomach churn. The figure stepped closer. I grabbed Corey and shook him. "Snap out of it!" He blinked, like he was waking up from a dream, and slammed the door shut. For a moment, the house was silent, and then the clock struck 12. When I opened my eyes, I was back at the bar. Same drink in my hand, same gray-haired bartender wiping down the counter, same snow falling outside the window. I thought I'd fallen asleep or something, but then Corey turned to me and said, "You all right? You've been acting weird all night." "All night," I echoed. "Yeah," he said, laughing. "You're the one who wanted to come here for Groundhog Day, remember?" I didn't say anything. I couldn't, because I didn't suggest the trip. Corey did, and we'd already been to the bar, already driven past the cemetery, already. I looked at the clock. 11:15 p.m. I've been stuck here ever since. Every time the clock strikes 12, I wake up back at the bar. I've tried everything. Staying put, running away, even confronting that thing in the cemetery. But no matter what I do, the day resets. And the figure, it gets closer every time. I don't know how long I have left, but I can feel it. It's waiting for me to give up. If you're ever in Punxsutawney on Groundhog Day, don't stay out past midnight. And whatever you do, don't let it point at you. What do you think? The hole in the snow. You ever have one of those days where everything feels just off? like you're walking through a dream where the colors aren't quite right and the air feels heavy. That was my Groundhog Day, the last one I'll ever celebrate if I survive. I was staying at a friend's cabin deep in the woods. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend, a few beers, some bad movies, and plenty of snow. Just me, my girlfriend Megan, and our mutual friend Jake. The cabin was isolated, surrounded by miles of dense forest. No neighbors, no cell service, just peace and quiet, or so I thought. The first strange thing happened early in the day. We were out in the woods, hiking to a spot Jake swore had the best views. The snow was fresh, untouched, and everything was silent except for the crunch of our boots. Then Megan stopped suddenly. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We all froze. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the wind through the trees. Then I heard it, a faint whistling. It wasn't a bird or the wind. It was deliberate, a tune carried through the cold air. "Probably just someone else hiking," Jake said, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. But the thing was, there shouldn't have been anyone else out there. We kept walking, but the sound followed us, always just out of sight. Megan clung to my arm, her breath visible in the icy air. That's when we found it, a hole. It was in the middle of a snow-covered clearing, perfectly round and about 6 feet wide. The edges were clean, like it had been cut with a giant cookie cutter, and it was deep. So deep that when we shone our flashlights into it, the beam just disappeared into darkness. "Did someone dig this?" Megan asked, her voice trembling. "Maybe," Jake said, crouching at the edge. "But why? And how? The snow's too fresh. There aren't even tracks around it." He was right. The snow was pristine, undisturbed, except for our footprints. I leaned closer, peering into the blackness. That's when the whistling started again, louder this time, echoing up from the hole. We bolted back to the cabin. None of us wanted to talk about what we'd seen. Megan made hot cocoa while Jake fiddled with the wood stove, both of them trying to act like everything was fine. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Around midnight, the storm rolled in. The wind howled, rattling the windows, and the snow piled up fast. We were stuck inside, huddled around the fire. That's when the power went out. Jake swore, fumbling for a flashlight. Megan squeezed my hand, her nails digging into my skin. "It's fine," I said, trying to sound calm. "The storm probably knocked out a line." But then I heard it, the whistling. It was faint at first, barely audible over the wind, but it grew louder, closer. Jake froze, his flashlight beam trembling as it scanned the dark corners of the room. "That's outside, right?" No one answered, and then the front door creaked open. The wind howled through the open doorway, scattering snow across the floor. I grabbed the flashlight from Jake and pointed it outside. Nothing, just snow and darkness. Megan whispered, "We locked the door, didn't we?" "We did," I said, though I wasn't sure anymore. Then from the edge of the woods, I saw a shadow move. It wasn't human. It was too tall, too thin, and its arms hung unnaturally low, almost scraping the ground. It stood just at the edge of the light, swaying like a tree in the wind. The whistling stopped, and then it pointed. At me. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my heart pounding in my chest. Jake was already piling furniture against the door while Megan sobbed quietly into her hands. The cabin felt smaller, suffocating, like the walls were closing in. "Maybe it'll leave us alone," Megan whispered, but deep down, I knew better. Around 3 a.m., the storm started to die down. The wind faded, leaving the cabin eerily quiet. Too quiet. I shone the flashlight around the room, my pulse racing. "Where's Jake?" Megan looked up, her face pale. "He was just here." "Jake!" I called, but there was no answer. The back door was open, snow blowing in through the gap, and Jake's footprints led straight into the woods. I grabbed my coat and flashlight, ignoring Megan's protests, and followed the tracks. The cold bit at my skin, and the beam of light barely pierced the darkness. The footprints led back to the clearing, to the hole. Jake was standing at the edge, staring down into the blackness. "Jake!" I shouted, running toward him. He turned slowly, his face blank, his eyes hollow. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice distant. "What are you talking about? Get away from there." But he just smiled, and then he jumped. I froze, staring into the darkness where he disappeared. The whistling started again, louder than ever, surrounding me, filling my head. I stumbled back to the cabin, dragging Megan into the car. We didn't pack, didn't look back. We just drove, the tires skidding on the icy road, but no matter how far we went, The whistling followed. Now, every night I hear it. It's outside my apartment, in the hallways at work, even in my dreams. And every morning, I wake up to fresh snow on my windowsill. I don't know what's in that hole, but it wants me. And one day, I'm afraid I'll go to it. What do you think? The man in the mirror. You ever stare into a mirror and feel like something's off? Like your reflection isn't just a reflection, but something watching you, waiting for you to look away? That's how my Groundhog Day started. I live alone in a small apartment. It's not much, but it's quiet, and I like it that way. February 2nd was supposed to be just another boring day. I woke up late, had my coffee, and shuffled into the bathroom to brush my teeth. When I glanced at the mirror, I noticed something strange. My reflection wasn't moving. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I waved my hand in front of my face, and the reflection followed, just a second too late. Okay, weird, I muttered, trying to shake off the unease. But the longer I stared, the more I noticed little things. The way its eyes seemed a bit darker than mine. The way its lips curled into a faint smirk when mine didn't. I told myself I was just tired. Maybe I needed more coffee. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The day passed uneventfully, though I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I walked past a reflective surface, a window, my phone screen, even the silverware in the kitchen, I caught glimpses of something. At first, it was subtle, just a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. But as the day went on, it got worse. I swear I saw my reflection blink when I didn't. By nightfall, I was on edge. I decided to ignore the mirrors altogether, avoiding the bathroom and keeping the lights dim. But as I lay in bed, I heard something. A soft, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from the bathroom. My heart pounded as I crept toward the door, every instinct screaming at me to turn around. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, like fingernails drumming against glass. When I finally opened the door, the bathroom was dark. But the mirror was glowing faintly, its surface rippling like water, and my reflection was gone. I don't know what possessed me to step closer. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was fear. But as I leaned in, the rippling stopped. The mirror was still again, showing only my face. But it wasn't me. The reflection tilted its head, grinning wide enough to show all its teeth. Then it spoke. Trade places with me. I stumbled back, slamming the door shut and locking it. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pressed my ear to the wood, listening. The tapping continued, louder now, accompanied by a low, guttural laugh. I didn't sleep that night. When morning came, I was relieved to see the sunlight streaming through my windows. The events of the previous night felt distant, like a bad dream. I cautiously opened the bathroom door, half expecting the mirror to still be glowing. But everything was normal. No ripples, no grinning reflection, just me. I thought it was over until I saw the date on my phone, February 2nd, again. I tried to ignore it. Maybe my phone was glitching. Maybe I'd misread the date. But as the day unfolded, everything happened exactly the same. The late wake-up, the coffee, the reflection that didn't quite match my movements, and the tapping. Every night it gets worse. The reflection speaks more now, its voice growing louder and more confident. It tells me things I don't want to hear. It knows my thoughts, my fears, my secrets, and every time the clock strikes midnight, I wake up back in my bed, staring at my own face in the darkened mirror. I've tried smashing it. I've tried covering it with blankets, throwing it away, even moving to a different apartment. But no matter where I go, no matter what I do, the mirror finds me. And the reflection is always waiting. Last night it said something different. You're running out of time. I don't know what happens when the loops end, but I think it wants to switch places, and I'm afraid that next time I won't be able to stop it. What do you think? The snowman. Did you ever build something as a kid that felt alive? Like for a second, you swore it could see you? That happened to me last Groundhog Day, except this wasn't some cute memory. It was the day I realized something was watching me. It started when the storm hit. The whole town was snowed in. No work, no school, just endless white piling up outside. By midday, I was going stir-crazy. The silence of the snow pressed against the windows like a thick blanket, and the air inside my house felt too still. So I bundled up and went outside, hoping the cold would shake off the weird tension I felt. That's when I saw them. Kids in my neighborhood building snowmen. Rows and rows of them, stretching along the sidewalks like a frozen army. I decided to make one, too. Why not? It's not like I had anything better to do. The air was sharp, biting at my cheeks, and the snow was perfect, soft but packed easily. I started with the base, rolling it until it was nearly as tall as my waist, then the middle, a little smaller, and finally the head. I gave it stick arms and dug through my house for old buttons, a scarf, and a hat to give it some character. By the time I was done, it looked weirdly good, almost too good. It wasn't until I stepped back to admire it that I noticed something odd. The other snowmen, all the ones the kids had made, were facing the street. But mine was facing me. I laughed it off, chalking it up to the way I'd placed the head. But as the day wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that its button eyes were following me. Every time I looked out the window, it seemed closer. At first, I thought it was just the shadows shifting as the sun set. But then night fell, and the snowman was still there, staring at my house with its blank, frozen grin. Around midnight, I heard something, a faint crunching noise like footsteps in the snow. I peeked out the window, my breath fogging up the glass. The snowman hadn't moved, but the snow around it was disturbed, small, shallow imprints leading away from it, like something had walked. But there were no kids outside, no tracks leading to or from my house, just those marks disappearing into the darkness. I told myself I was imagining things, that the storm and the isolation were messing with my head. I went to bed, but my dreams were restless, filled with images of black button eyes and stick fingers scratching at my windows. I woke up drenched in sweat, the room icy despite the heater running full blast. And then I heard it again. Crunch. Crunch. Closer this time. I didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed at me to stay under the covers, to pretend I was still asleep, but something pulled me out of bed, my feet moving against my will. I crept to the window, heart hammering in my chest, and peeked out. The snowman was gone. I turned on every light in the house, double-checking the locks and grabbing the heaviest object I could find, a fireplace poker. The night dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity. I jumped at every sound, every gust of wind rattling the windows. Finally, the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. I let out a shaky breath, thinking I'd made it through the night. But when I opened the door to check outside, my blood ran cold. The snowman was back, standing right in front of my porch. Its grin was wider now, its button eyes slightly crooked like it had been stretched, and its stick arms were reaching up as if trying to grab something. I didn't go outside again that day. I stayed in, curtains drawn, trying to pretend it wasn't there. But every time I peeked through the window, I swore it was getting closer. Then midnight hit, and everything went black. I woke up the next morning, heart racing, expecting to see it at my window, but the snowman was gone. For a moment, I thought it was over, until I saw the date, February 2nd. Again. The cycle kept repeating. No matter what I did, no matter how far I drove or how carefully I avoided building it, the snowman always came back. Each time it got worse. The footprints in the snow grew deeper, the stick arms longer, the grin wider. Last night, I swear I heard it whisper my name. I don't know how many loops I've been through now, but I know one thing for sure, it's not just a snowman. And it's not going to stop until it gets inside. What do you think? The knocking. Have you ever had one of those moments where you think you hear something, but it's late, and you convince yourself it's nothing? You tell yourself it's the wind, or maybe the pipes creaking? Well, I used to think that too, until Groundhog Day last year. Now, I know better. It was a quiet night, colder than usual. The snowstorm earlier that day had left the roads covered in ice, and the whole neighborhood was tucked inside, lights glowing faintly behind curtains. I just settled into bed with a book, glad to finally unwind. That's when I heard it. Knock! 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 3 sharp raps, deliberate and heavy, like someone tapping on a hollow surface. At first, I thought it came from the front door. I checked, but no one was there. The porch was empty, untouched snow stretching to the street. I shrugged it off as my imagination and locked up tighter. But just as I climbed back into bed, knock, knock, knock. This time it sounded closer, like it was coming from inside. I froze, straining to hear. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, but the house was silent. No creaks, no wind, just the faint hum of the heater. I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. It's probably nothing, I said aloud, as if hearing my voice would make it real. But then it happened again. Knock, knock, knock. This time it was unmistakable, coming from the closet in my bedroom. My stomach twisted into knots. I told myself it was absurd, that there was no way anything could be in there. I'd lived in that house for years. No secret doors, no crawl spaces, just an ordinary closet. Still, I couldn't ignore it. Clutching my phone like a lifeline, I crept toward the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle, my breath fogging the air in the suddenly cold room. I yanked it open. Nothing. Just clothes and boxes, the usual clutter. I laughed, shakier this time, and shut the door. Get a grip, I muttered, climbing back into bed. But as soon as I turned off the light, knock, knock, knock. It didn't stop after that. All night long, the knocking continued, sometimes soft, like fingertips brushing the walls, other times loud and insistent, echoing through the house. I barely slept, jumping at every noise, every shadow. By morning, I was exhausted, but at least it was over. I thought it was some weird one-off event, maybe the storm messing with my nerves, until I saw the date on my phone. February 2nd, again. The day played out exactly the same snowstorm, same eerie silence in the neighborhood. And when night fell, the knocking started again. No matter what I did, turning up the TV, playing music, even leaving the house, it followed me. It wasn't just the closet anymore either. Now it came from the walls, the floor, the windows, everywhere. I started tearing the place apart, searching for the source. I checked the attic, the basement, every inch of the house, but there was nothing. No hidden speakers, no animals trapped in the walls, just me and the knocking. By the third loop, I was losing it. I tried staying awake all night, watching every corner of the room, but it didn't matter. The knocking grew louder, more frantic, as if something was trying to get in, or maybe trying to get out. Last night, something changed. I heard a voice. Faint at first, almost drowned out by the knocking, but it was there. A low, whispering murmur, speaking words I couldn't understand. I pressed my ear to the wall, desperate to hear it, and for a moment, it stopped. Then, clear as day, I heard it. Let me out. I don't remember what happened after that. I must have blacked out, because when I woke up, it was morning. My room was freezing, and the closet door was wide open. The knocking hasn't stopped since. It follows me now, everywhere I go, and every time I hear it, I know what it's waiting for. It wants me to open the door. What do you think? The Watcher. It's funny how a single day can change everything. You can live your life thinking it's ordinary, that nothing will ever disturb the peace you've carefully built around yourself, but then one small thing happens, something you can't explain, and everything you knew feels like a lie. That's what happened to me last Groundhog Day. It started with a simple walk in the park. Just me, my headphones, and the cold morning air. I always took the same route through the neighborhood, down the same path near the old oak tree. It was a quiet, peaceful part of town. Nothing special, just normal. I was lost in my thoughts, the music in my ears drowning out the rest of the world, when I noticed something. A man, sitting on a bench, just watching me. He was older, maybe in his mid-60s, with thick gray hair and a heavy coat. His eyes were hidden behind dark sunglasses, but something about the way he was sitting, so still, so perfectly still, made me uneasy. I couldn't tell if he was staring at me or just at the ground, but I knew he was watching. I shrugged it off. Maybe he was just people watching, right? It was a public park, after all. I tried not to let it bother me, but as I kept walking, I felt his gaze following me. By the time I reached the end of the park, I turned back for one last glance. He was still there, motionless, as if he'd never moved an inch. I shook my head. It was probably nothing. The next day, I decided to walk again, just to clear my head. But when I passed by the oak tree, I saw him again, sitting on the same bench, watching me. This time, I felt a knot twist in my stomach. My heart started to race, but I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe he was just there to enjoy the quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I went home that day and tried to forget about him. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those dark sunglasses, the way his head never moved. The next few days were a blur, but I noticed something strange. The man was always there, Always in the park, always sitting on that same bench, his eyes hidden behind his glasses, but I could feel them on me, heavy, like they were boring into my soul. It was getting to me. I couldn't even enjoy my walks anymore. By the time Groundhog Day rolled around, I was a wreck. I had barely slept, barely eaten. I was consumed by the thought of the man in the park, the way he watched, the way I felt watched. So I went out that morning, determined to face my fear. When I reached the park, my heart was pounding. I kept telling myself it was all in my head, that I was just being paranoid. But when I turned the corner, there he was, sitting on the bench. But this time he wasn't wearing sunglasses. His eyes were wide open, and they were locked on me. I froze. His eyes weren't just staring at me, they were sinking into me. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like I was being pulled toward him. I took a step back, my pulse racing, my hands clammy. That's when I heard it. A soft, rasping voice, just barely audible over the wind. "I've been waiting for you." I turned and ran. I ran like my life depended on it, my feet barely touching the ground, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't stop until I was safely back in my apartment, locked behind the doors. But no matter how many locks I set, no matter how much I tried to calm myself down, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still there, watching. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of his eyes haunted me, and I knew, deep down, that I couldn't escape him. It was as if he had marked me. I don't know how long I stayed awake, but when I finally drifted off, I woke up to the sound of a knock at my door. I got up, half dazed, expecting to see a delivery or maybe a neighbor needing something. But when I opened the door, there was no one there, except for a small note left on the ground. I picked it up, hands shaking. "I told you I've been waiting for you. Now you'll never leave." I don't know how long I've been stuck in this loop now. Every morning I wake up and it's Groundhog Day again. I go for my walk and he's always there, always watching. The worst part, he knows everything. He knows when I'll turn, when I'll look away, when I'll try to escape, and every time the same words echo in my mind, "You'll never leave." What do you think? The reflection. Have you ever stood in front of a mirror and gotten that feeling that something was off? Not that the reflection was wrong exactly, but that something behind you wasn't quite right? I didn't think much of it until last Groundhog Day. It started as an ordinary day. The snow was falling outside, and I was stuck at home, curled up with my coffee and a good book. There wasn't much to do, but I liked it that way. The quiet gave me time to think, time to breathe. But around noon, I went into the bathroom to wash my hands, and that's when I saw it. My reflection was wrong. At first, it was subtle. I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just the lighting. But when I looked into the mirror, something was off about the way my face looked. It was like I was standing a little too still, like my reflection was waiting for me to make the first move. I rubbed my eyes, chalking it up to lack of sleep. But when I looked again, my reflection didn't move the way I did. It stayed frozen for a moment before it smiled, a little too wide, a little too slow. I stepped back, my breath catching in my throat. What the hell was that? I shook my head, telling myself I was just tired, maybe a little off after a long week, but I couldn't forget that smile, the way it stayed too long, the way it watched me. I spent the rest of the day trying to shake it off, but something was nagging at me. Every time I walked past a mirror, I couldn't help but look, and every time my reflection seemed wrong. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror again, forcing myself to confront it. I studied my face, the way my lips curved into a small frown, the way my eyes looked tired. Everything seemed normal, but when I looked closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A shadow just behind me. I spun around, heart hammering. There was nothing there. I turned back to the mirror. The shadow was gone, but my reflection hadn't moved. It was still smiling, not my smile. A different one, a twisted one. I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted out of the bathroom, pacing through the house. What was happening? Was it the house? The mirrors? Was I losing my mind? I couldn't explain it, but I couldn't escape it either. No matter where I went, no matter how many times I checked the mirrors, the reflection was there, watching me, and it was getting worse. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of tapping, soft at first, like fingernails on glass. I looked around, disoriented. The room was dark, the only light coming from the moon outside. My eyes fell to the mirror beside my bed. I froze. In the reflection, I saw my own eyes, wide and terrified, staring back at me. But I wasn't the one looking. The reflection was looking at me. I screamed and turned away, scrambling out of bed, but it wasn't over. I could hear the tapping again, louder this time, closer, as if it was coming from the mirror itself. I pressed my hands to my ears, desperate to block it out, but the sound only got worse. The tapping became a banging, then a scratching. I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to look. I had to. When I approached the mirror, I saw my reflection move again. But this time, it wasn't just standing there. It was reaching toward me. I felt it before I saw it, like something cold and heavy pressing against my chest. I staggered back, but my reflection didn't. It stayed there, its eyes locked onto mine, and then it smiled again. But this time, the smile wasn't just twisted, it was hungry. I've been stuck in this loop ever since. Every Groundhog Day, I wake up, and it's the same thing. The tapping, the scratching, the reflection that isn't mine, but is always watching. I don't know how many times I've lived through this day. Maybe this is it. The loop I'm trapped in. Maybe I'm just a reflection now watching from the other side of the glass, but I know one thing for sure. The reflection is coming for me. And this time, I don't think it's letting go. What do you think? The window. I've always been someone who's okay with being alone. In fact, I prefer it. I've got my routine, my little world. I like the quiet. But that all changed last Groundhog Day. It started off like any other day. The weather was cold, but nothing out of the ordinary, just snow falling softly outside my window. I woke up late, as usual, grabbed a cup of coffee, and settled into my couch with a book. Nothing special. But then, around noon, something caught my eye through the window. I wasn't looking for anything, but there it was. Across the street, a figure standing still in the yard of the house next door. I squinted. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on me, maybe a tree branch swaying in the snow. But no, this figure was standing perfectly still, like it had been there for hours. I didn't recognize them. Not a neighbor, not someone I'd seen before. I felt a strange chill creep up my spine. I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was just someone passing by, someone in the neighborhood who'd stopped to rest. But when I glanced again, they hadn't moved. I couldn't tell if they were looking at me or just staring blankly ahead. Their face was obscured by a heavy coat and a hood, but their posture was rigid, unnatural. I tried to brush it off. "It's nothing," I muttered to myself, but I couldn't stop looking. For the rest of the afternoon, I kept checking. Every time I looked out the window, the figure was still there, always in the same spot. When the sun dipped lower, the figure didn't move. It was as if they were waiting. That night, the house felt colder than usual. I tried to focus on something, anything, but my mind kept drifting back to the figure. My curiosity gnawed at me. Who were they? Why were they just standing there? I glanced out the window once more, hoping I was just imagining things, but no. The figure was still there, still unmoving, except this time they weren't alone. I could see two smaller shapes, figures standing beside them, like shadows blending into the darkness. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but no. There were definitely more. My heart started racing. I had no idea what was going on, but I knew I didn't like it. I couldn't tear myself away from the window. I had my body frozen in place as I watched the figures stand motionless in the snow. Hours passed. I don't know how long I stood there. My eyes felt heavy, but I kept looking, unable to pull myself away from whatever was happening across the street. And then, as if they'd been waiting for some signal, the figures moved. They moved all at once, suddenly and slowly, like something unnatural was propelling them forward. They didn't walk. They floated. And then they started to move toward my house. I stumbled back from the window, panic swelling in my chest. I was alone. I hadn't seen anyone come close to my house all day. There was no reason for these figures to be anywhere near me, but somehow they were. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I tried to call someone, anyone. But the screen was blank, as if it hadn't even been turned on. I tried again. Nothing. I could hear their footsteps now, soft and dragging across the snow. They were close. The knocking came next, 3 sharp raps on my front door. I don't know how long I stood there, my heart hammering in my chest. The knocking continued, steady and unrelenting. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the air was thick with something foul. I knew I shouldn't open the door, but I had to. I had to know. I reached for the handle, every instinct in me screaming to run, but I couldn't move. I opened the door. Nothing. The night was silent. The yard was empty. I closed the door quickly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, watching. I tried to lock everything up, but the windows, those damn windows, they felt wrong. Every time I glanced at them, I saw shadows move, figures that weren't there before. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed in my bed, staring at the ceiling, too afraid to close my eyes. Every time I drifted off, I would wake with the feeling that they were watching me. The figures, their eyes, unblinking, unmoving, waiting. When I woke up the next morning, it was Groundhog Day again, the same snow, the same chill in the air, and across the street, the figure was still there, and now they were looking right at me. It's been like this every day since. I can't escape it. The figures don't go away, and they're always just waiting. I don't know what they want, but I'm starting to think they're not waiting for me to leave. I think they're waiting for me to open the door again. What do you think?